kind of just jumped into this, didn't I? Ah, crud. Alright, well, hello everybody. um, so for today, we are just going to try to do a quick brief video. I'm cutting my own time and basically making it harder for me to get ready for church, but I kind of wanted to get this off my head so I could finally just let this thought pattern trend just kind of go to sleep for a minute and I can focus on other things because I got tests to worry about. I wanted to talk about the idea of wealth and another concept of wealth that I was able to flesh out with some friends the other day that I think is important when we're talking about the gospel and the worth of the Bible. So as you guys can tell, we have 195 countries. Now, if through Israel we got the gospel, that means that there's at least the potential of having 159 interpretations of the gospel message that then could be subdivided into the various different counties or subdivision of territories that make up a population center. Human capital is the source of all renewable resources and non-renewable resources, in that in order to get oil we need human labor in order to go and mine whatever we need to mine, or draw up whatever resource we need. That process requires human capital, which is or human labor, which is generated by human capital. Human capital would be people who are qualified to do things for others, to provide services. um, Labor would be people who are capable of doing a service in order to produce a good. Along that train of thought, tracing it backwards, we are trying to get to the concept of human, the greatest currency is the human interpretation of reality, human autonomy. So, how human beings direct their actions, that is the greatest resource that anybody can harness. And this is why slavery is both insidious, but also it's the most ingenious way of harnessing human capital to its fullest potential, because you can literally deny the person the ability to utilize autonomy to produce whatever they want to produce, learn whatever skill they wish to learn, or do whatever they wish to do that could otherwise reduce your ability to produce this specific effect. So they would use slaves to mine resources they couldn't mine themselves, in the sense of it's extremely dangerous, extremely remote, or they just generally wanted to utilize a different resource so that they can then micromanage and then start to innovate into specific civilization-based technologies. So, case in point, the Mayas, the Aztecs, the production of the ziggurat systems in South America, a lot of that was produced through human autonomy being controlled, and thus controlling the human capital and the human labor to produce what we see now in Honorize now as a national icon of South America, which is kind of demented if you really think about it. But I mean, again, we're tearing down statues in America. Nobody's talking about destroying, the ziggurat. Spanish could have done it too. Think about it. Think about how angry everybody would be. The Native Americans had their temples destroyed, and it's like the temple was created through human sacrifice and slavery. And literally, most of the Native Americans who live in North America did so because they were escaping an empire to the north and several empires to the south. They just wanted to be free. So America's been a land of people who just don't want to be ruled by oligarchies for a long time. But that's a whole side tangent. The point of this conversation, though, again trying to be concise, is that human labor and human capital is produced for human autonomy, and how we direct it and shape it. We do that through laws, through education systems, and through different incentives and privileges that we provide different people within different locales to produce different things. Even if that effect or the thing that we're trying to produce is quote unquote peacefulness within a population. The idea is that how we shape human beings to use themselves, or human sovereignty, individual sovereignty, and collective sovereignty, how that is shaped is the most important resource among all resources. It directs warfare, it directs the economy, it directs everything down to religious inclinations and trends. Um, to understand this has been the crux of the last 2 centuries of scientific investigation into psychology and philosophy, and application of that into sociology, and how it's affected most of our civilization, especially with the removal of variable factors, and the replacement of those variable factors, like the use of the gospel or the use of social norms that would be considered now um, part of quote unquote white culture, a lot of those were actually variables that were meant to keep the different levels of indoctrination that our system naturally needs to produce within the human population that it's controlling in order to survive. It would basically neuter its ability or make it impotent in a sense, so that even though the state could technically control our autonomy, we still had freedom in how we shaped our perception of autonomy and how we perceived our way of contributing to the society at large. By removing the linchpin of our society in terms of how we interpreted ourselves in the grander narrative of humanity and shifting to a new model, we have fundamentally changed how we utilize human autonomy. And thus, we produce the effects that we see all around us, whether it's the right or the left. All of them are affected by this manipulation by those who have controlled our system collectively towards this end. It's not so much that it's any one particular members of this particular group, though we do live quite a long time, and having 40 years to shape 4 generations of humans actually is a huge effect. I mean, again, how much have the Rockefellers shaped human history just by controlling the means of production and the means of economic trade? That's huge. And again, this is concise. I'm trying to, get a lot out before we rush off to church because I've literally am giving myself like 15 minutes. But the general gist of what I'm trying to get at is that human capital is important, and that oftentimes when we talk about the wealth of nations and all of these different things, we don't realize that even though there is a personal currency that is generated in each locality, individualistic in a sense, there is in a sense, a more important overarching currency of trade that enables trade between small groups or tribes. So let's say you have 5 tribes. Each 5 tribes would produce their own form of human capital, human currency, which would be produced by what the autonomous humans within collectively do. Going a layer ahead, if those 5 tribes wish to do trade, not just between one tribe or another, each one having their own unilateral plan of confederacy of tribes, that's where the term comes from, and what it defines is that there are several individual sovereignties that collaborate on an individual level. So when the 13 colonies originally were a confederacy under the Articles of Confederacy, they were still a democratic republic, but they were organizing themselves as separate confederacies that unilaterally met and formed a sovereign republic. This would be the process by which each state would have its own, in a sense, Washington, D.C., located in its capital. Then it would differentiate itself into auxiliary capitals that would then hold a lot of legislative authority over the counties and the different cities and distributions of people. Um, Getting back on track, though, if you have the 5 tribes that are forming a confederacy, what you need is a shared form of currency that can be shared between them. Oftentimes, we did this through physical objects that we would trade in. We would trade currency like gold or seashells or salt in replacement for a oath or a pledge of action, a covenant, if you will. That covenant binds the 2 working parties into a contractual agreement whereby if one does not deliver, the other one will seek well, naturally, if people do wrong against each other, they seek recompense. But this is, again, we're going from ground zero. People murder each other if they want shiny rock thing or they want food. How do you stop that? You create a system by which I only kill you if you prove to me that you lied to me about being able to hunt that deer and give it to me, and I, instead of hunting deer, decide to sit around and produce clothes for you. So because I'm producing clothes for you, I expect that because you're a better hunter, you and other hunters that are better will share food in return for textile goods. And I will organize the people who don't hunt to produce textiles. That's basically how trade begins and how a different tribes and different families will orient themselves to produce guilds, and these guilds would form greater networks of trade unions, and then you would build yourself up to a marketplace or a mercantile, the mercantile class within a marketplace. And the marketplace is designed specifically to reduce combat. The marketplaces that we have, the economy, the economic systems that we utilize in the West, at least, they're largely dependent upon the prevention of combat through reducing the need to use force to get across whatever it is, or to get the resources that you wish to acquire, or the goods that you wish to have, or to produce the goods that you wish to produce. I mean, again, in order for America to produce technology, we would have to go to other countries and either beat them into submission to take the goods, colonialism, or we can purchase them out, techno-colonialism. Basically, the idea that we use our technological advancements to then barter these increased technology provides innovation, or the innovation provides for better technology provides for better means to produce goods. So when you're bartering technology, you're basically leveraging techno-colonialism over a nation. This is the process by which I would say that the left is going to pivot and eventually try to deconstruct the advancements into things of alternative technologies and alternative tech that could possibly save lives, help advance technology, get us into space. This is why they would flip flop on people like Elon Musk now that he is more openly quote unquote conservative when he's really not. A lot of these things are reactionary habits that we have as a mass, and then as individuals we take them on because of the downward pressure of social norms and social expectations. And again, for those who talk all the time about how social constructions are evil and we should fight against them, these new social constructions are actually worse for society and more harsh for us to go through because they are very unrelenting, they're abstract, they're not grounded on a tangible reality or an observation of reality. And that's not saying that they're wrong inherently. There is value to abstraction. There is value to being outside the box and thinking. I mean, look at me. I'm trying to basically get across a concept of total wealth. But this is the concept of total wealth that the Bible is talking about most. So when we're talking about the idea of a man being wealthy, truly wealthy in the eyes of God, we're talking about a man who has the wealth of human capital on his side. It's not that the rich man is rich not on monetary means alone. You could be rich and poor because you don't know how to use your wealth. I mean, again, win the lottery. You don't have the human capital to properly utilize your lottery winnings. You end up poor within a year, and they've done studies where they've seen that that's the trend. Most of us who come off the streets into vast amounts of wealth do not know how to utilize human capital and human labor. And there's another term that we could probably use, which is how would I put this? You have human autonomy, which leads into human capital and human labor. But the reason why it leads to capital and labor production within a society is because of personal application. Again, you have currency that is being traded, but the currency is a representative of the end result. But the production of that end result oftentimes requires the accumulation of resources. So let's say in order to produce the textiles, I have to pluck a certain kind of herb. But on top of plucking a certain kind of herb, I also have to get a certain kind of clay and something like that to dye. Okay, well, I have all the people who aren't hunting. Let's say 100 people aren't hunting. Half of them are men, half of them are women. The women, I could send them up into the mountains. That could be perfectly plausible. Let's send them off into the mountains. But we also have a bunch of women who are also mostly mothers because we're a small tribe and we're living in the middle of freaking nowhere and we're cavemen. So, assuming the caveman principle and that there's not really a reason for us to go against the grain and throw our women out to the wolves so that they could possibly get killed while we need them to reproduce, because otherwise our species goes extinct, playing around with the Darwin situation and what is scientifically applicable, what you would then see is that, okay, us 50 men, we're going to go, we're going to do the more dangerous job. I'm going to trust a woman, a representative of my side of things, to handle that side of the textile production. We'll all then meet, we'll join together, and then we will go and produce textiles to then go trade so we can eat with the guys who go hunting. And the guys who are hunting, they're going and hunting deer. But does that mean that they can't hunt other animals and small game and other things? So maybe they're not oriented towards farming. That could be another tribe. Maybe they're not oriented towards, textile production, which is this other tribe on, that side. But these guys are great at hunting. Do they not teach their women how to hunt then? Why wouldn't they? So the gender roles would be changed, but they wouldn't be. because the women would be oriented towards hunting small game. They would be hunting game that does not put them and the children at risk of being murdered. And they would be still trained to know when they're being stalked by other animals, because there were saber-toothed lions back then. There were giant animals that would routinely demolish entire groups of humans because, hey, free food. It's free. So, getting into this idea is that, of course, there have been many different expressions of what it means to be in a male gender role or a female gender role, but all of that is produced through personal application, which is shaped by human autonomy of the individual and the collective. Or at least let's better unpack this, because again, I'm not using like an outline. One last time. Lord help me, please help me get this across so I can go, because it's 15 minutes. And I'm pretty certain I made my point 3 times and backwards. What the Bible provides, what the gospel has provided for the Western culture and society, is not just the printing press, it's not just advancements in our philosophy, our perceptions of morality, and all these things that are still held on to by those who leave the Christian worldview behind and want it to be annexed from our Western societies and history and senses of identity as Westerners. But still, it has permeated most of our society through its advancements to our innovation, our perceptions of self, and all of these factors. It has fundamentally shaped how the Western societies utilize human autonomy to produce capital and labor. And because of that, and again, this is why Marx hugely well, again, he's an anti-Semite, so there's a reason why anti-Semites hate the religion that came from the Semitic religion. Judaism is Semitic, so to be Jewish and believe in the Abrahamic religion would make you a Semite who believes in a Semite people and a Semite, divinity cast of kings and priests and all of that. Well, Christians still adopted that. We just believe the priesthood was consolidated for Christ. Christ was a Semite. So we're Semites, and a lot of us have adopted a pro-Semite approach to the world. Now, pro-Semitism is different from anti-Semitism in the Christian world in the sense that people like Luther, they had a lot of nitpicks and issues because of the conflicts between the Abrahamic faiths going on at the time. But when we talk about this new emergence, like again, a lot of what Luther was going through was nuxed out around the time America was founded, because America was founded with a sizable proportion of our population being Jewish. America was partially founded by Jewish and Christian ideals and people and tribes who came into America and settled in the 13 colonies. That was a huge thing. Like, some Christian sects didn't believe in doing trade, and they would utilize it the same way they did in Europe, but they were trying to do it in a way that did not honor things like the Church of England or things like the Roman Catholic Church. So the Church of England isn't just a nationalized church. The Church of England was a nationalized church that was seeking to be a rival power with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was imperialist back then. The Church of England was colonial. America was founded on a church republic. So there's various different sects, they all are represented, and all of us are allowed to pick our over-representatives over our representatives. And so onwards until the republic is fleshed out. And that was on the basis of which we formed the Confederacy, going full circle, and then from there we formed our republic through the Declaration, or not the Declaration, but through the not the Articles of Confederation, but then the founding of the U.S. Constitution, the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And again, the whole founding of the Bill of Rights and Articles of Confederation is, again, both a reference to Jewish wedding ceremonies, the signing of the kabut. I'm sorry, I can't speak the word. I'm still kind of, black. Not being racist about it. It's just I don't know freaking Jew. I don't know Aramaic. Yet alone do I know the different forms. I think it's like Yiddish and other forms of the dialect. So I don't even know which forms of pronunciation I'm supposed to make. So sorry. But there's basically a concept where, as you're getting married, you basically take the two families, they put out their family history, and they wove the two families together through the two children that are getting married. It's a similar process, I think, through the Bill of Rights, because you have the Federalist and Anti-Federalist. These people who want small government and the people who want big government, as it was explained to us in our wonderful public education system. From that, we basically generated a concept by which one side could enfranchise this overlaying structure of a system, and the others could deconstruct that system, and a living organism was created through that union of inorganic and organic um, legislation. So, where there is legislation, you're basically making a written pact to act against a certain action. That also means that there can be legislation to inaction, thus, Bill of Rights, but also that implies that there is an application of legislation which can be prescribed without being prescribed. In a sense, what the Constitution did, which is prescribe authorities and sub-authorities. Again, I'm just basically very much being basic in terms of how I would perceive this stuff and layer it out on a graph for myself. Um, they would basically layer it downwards um, and apply it to the lowest factor from the highest authority. A lot of this was done to secure the system and allow for the variable elements, what I was talking about before, this kind of variable influence on the systems of our government to act freely and to move freely like cells and like white blood cells within that greater system. And this greater system can hold as a structure, the skin and the skeleton of the greater body of our government. Wrapping this all back around to wealth, America has generated a large amount of its wealth through human capital and human labor. That was not all because of slavery. A large part of what slavery actually did was reduce human capital and labor because it affected the ability to utilize over several, well, some people say several million, it could have been as low as hundred thousands at certain points, to having millions upon trillions of people shoveled onto boats across here. The variables change depending on who you're talking to as an expert, which is kind of frustrating right now for me. But the gist of it is that slave labor reduced the ability to utilize those people as free agents to learn skills, services, and then form their own enterprises. So the whole point of capitalism is that if you're a capitalist, you can't have slavery. That's the hard part. If you have slavery in your nation, you can't be free market capitalism. You can't be a free market capitalist nation and have slavery. Not in the truest sense of a republic or a democracy. Well, in a democracy, you actually could have slavery in a capitalism, but it wouldn't be free market capitalism, insofar as the market would still be controlled in terms of who can enter into the market. So the idea of requiring legislation or certain types of barriers to enter into the purchasing or the creation of a business is actually a form of limiting somebody's ability to have autonomy. Or, crap, I'm getting all mixed up. Mixing three different fields into one wonderful synergy. Um, Slave labor reduces the ability to generate human autonomy within the people who are enslaved. When the people who are enslaved and their autonomy is reduced, you cannot use them to produce innovations that would make your capital and labor go farther in terms of the production of wealth that you're trying to get out of it. So GDP was actually affected by slavery. It was only beneficial to own slaves once the cotton gin was created. So when the cotton gin was created and they found and there was alternatives to the cotton gin both before and after, that's something they don't tell us, but cotton gin inventions and other inventions that utilize slave labor in order to basically do a lot of things quicker without having to purchase and pay people as much as possible, you reduce the GDP that was actually being produced. But you increased how much revenue we were able to retain. So through slavery, you can retain more earnings. And this is also something that can be achieved through automation or can be achieved through well, post neo slavery. Let's just call it that. The idea that wage slavery, that's the term I'm thinking of. Wage slavery is basically an alternative to slavery. You, instead of enslaving a small segment of people who you have to pay to send over here, you instead create a group in your society that you force to work all the time. And you get as much of the members of that society to work as possible. You get the children to work, you get the women to work, get the men to work. And what did we see before we started actually using certain types of laws in order to reduce this form? Because again, we had slavery. So once we had slavery, we never had free market capitalism. That's the problem. The same argument you can make for Marxism is true for laissez-faire capitalism. There's never been a form of laissez-faire capitalism because there's always been a form of control over how people can do trade and barter and actually be able to make money. So if you can control how people make money, you don't have laissez-faire capitalism. That's the harsh reality of trying to apply that to Marxism. If you want to really just say capitalism doesn't work, then you have to say socialism doesn't work, and we just need to come up with something completely different. Maybe the gospel. Going back, and also because it's almost time for me to take a shower and get moving, what the gospel provides is a way of shaping society. And my personal working issue here on the channel, at least things that I've been working on lately and things that I've been trying to figure out how best to explain or expand upon, relate to the idea that perhaps what we don't need is forced belief systems, but instead we want people to have philosophical outlooks that shape the perception of their potential depth of understanding of reality. So instead of making every single atheist preach that Christ is the highest standard of their living when he's really not, and they're actually just going behind doors to go and do whatever they want, I think that's a worse thing to do to the gospel than it would be to allow the gospel to just hit people as it is and live in a country that actually just decides, you know what? It's not that everybody needs to believe in this, it's that this thing is actually trying to keep us from killing each other, and it gives us a good example of things not to do and things we can do or things we should do to make other people's lives better. Perhaps that may be the way that we need to linchpin this argument, because again, how much wealth has been wasted through these useless endeavors and redirections of human autonomy to produce capital and labor for people who are honestly just consuming it. They're not trying to use it to generate better conditions for everyone else. The better conditions come as an expression of the collective will to improve itself, to become a more intact and more stable body. We don't like warfare, but we are a warring species. We don't like ignorance, but we choose to be ignorant. We human beings are full of the contradictions of any organism that has consciousness. Again, dolphins do some pretty jacked up things. Most life forms that we can credit with being super moral usually do messed up things. The only ones that I don't see do that usually aren't the ones who have a lot of, gusto and the we're going to be proactive in destroying the world department. And that might be elephants, and even elephants go on murder sprees when they're sufficiently vexed and prone, forced to sin, because technically sin is to go against one's nature and or to do something that misses the mark. So if the elephant is supposed to, do something that doesn't kill somebody and they do it and it kills somebody, that's, sinning. Technically, an elephant can sin also whenever it goes on a rampage. But again, sin is produced within us as an effect of our interaction with the dying world and its effect on us. We live in a world of entropy. Without entropy, I don't think that we'd be prone to react and act the way that we do. And perhaps entropy is really why we develop the type of economic systems and monetary systems that we talk about and fight over. And if we're fighting over a system that in and of itself is just trying to keep us alive so that we can die longer, why are we following these economic systems, whether it's capitalism or Marxism? There has to be something better. There has to be something different. Maybe not better, but different. And we can't get to that if we're going to continuously try to hold on to these two hills that are eroding beneath us into the sea. We don't have long, and the peninsula is slowly turning into an island, and I don't want to be isolated on it. So you all can fight about these two dichotomies if you wish. I'd rather understand where the two are beneficial and naturally arise within human systems, and where they naturally should be prevented from arising within the human system. And I think the Bible has enough experiences of those economic systems, those worldviews, those philosophies within its text throughout these last, 10,000 years of human history that it's taught basically encoding, if not trillions of hundreds of years that might be encoding, if this really is from the divine messenger who sees time wither away where 1,000 years are like seconds to him. I mean, again, if there's a lot of computed knowledge within this text like Christians believe, then perhaps that might be a good guide to use to shape these other systems that we're trying to come up with. Again, the one thing that we can say everybody has done in terms of creating these new economic systems is they've all thrown out the Bible and went, Christianity doesn't work when it comes to economic systems because people who weren't Christians got in charge and then did things that weren't in the Bible. And it's like, so what would happen if Christians who actually believed in the Bible became the ones in charge? We don't know. We never saw that. And those who have, they've always had other things pulling on them and tying them down to a world that would lead them to only think about entropy rather than the production of prosperity. Jeez, don't think I'm a prosperity gospel teacher just because I use that term. But the idea of prosperity in the wealth sense, to produce human capital and labor, is to have prosperity in a nation. A nation is prosperous when people are willing to do things, to produce things, to make other people's lives better. So anyways, I'm leaving you guys with that. I need to get on with my life, and plus I kind of want to actually be on time for church. Make it move it. See you guys. Oh shoot, I hit record. Wait, was I not streaming this whole time? Or are you just janking me and it's on the other channel? It's probably on the other channel. Shoot, that means I actually have to do work tonight. Darn it. Yeah, I'm pretty certain that I did it on the wrong one. Didn't I? Yeah, I probably did. Whatever. We'll see if it actually came out. If not, this was a good test run.